Hi there, I'm back with a quick installment of Theology of Pop Music. This is the third edition. This week I'm looking at Phil Collins' song, Do You Remember, from his 1989 album, But Seriously. Lots of hits on that album, including this song, which hit number 4 on the US pop charts, Do You Remember? And from my recollection of Phil Collins, I was a big Phil Collins fan as a youngster, as a teenager, and then college student, young adult. And my recollection is that this album, But Seriously, is the most autobiographical album, at least of his popular albums. Phil Collins, if you know anything about his personal life, then you know that his marriages are kind of a train wreck. I mean, he is a relationship disaster, and I don't know the reasons for that. I know it's very easy to look at the lives of celebrities, pop stars, actors, and sometimes feel like, wow, why in the world should we listen to these kind of people, given the complete chaos that you see in their personal lives? And Phil Collins is one good example of that. It's kind of that giftedness that is almost on the verge sometimes of insanity. I mean, it's like you think about the great artists like Vincent van Gogh, who was just such an amazing artist, but also struggled with his mental health. I mean, there's like something about creativity. When you're so creative, you can sense things, you can feel things, you can see things in particular ways, but yet sometimes that doesn't translate into an ability to live a life that's filled with happiness and peace. And Phil Collins would be one of those kind of examples. And so from this album, But Seriously, you have songs like this one, Do You Remember, which really speaks about what goes wrong or what happens at the end of a relationship that has gone bad. And I think all of us can relate to this on a personal level, that there are relationships in our lives that we look back on that we wish we hadn't let go to rot. You know what I mean? Maybe it was a good friend from high school. Maybe it was a girlfriend, boyfriend. Maybe it was a spouse that you've divorced from. You look back sometimes on those things that went bad, and you look back with regret. And I think that's kind of natural, is that we all wish that we had maybe been able to salvage a relationship that meant something to us at one time. Now, the reality is that not all relationships can be salvaged. Is that it's not necessarily anybody's fault when a relationship ends. Sometimes it just is what it is. But that sadness, that mourning within us that occurs at the breaking of relationships is a deep wounding that affects us as humans. And this song, I think, speaks of that. You listen to the lyrics as you get to I think kind of the second verse here, where he says, "You could have come over to my side. You could have let me know. You could have tried to see the distance between us, but it seems too far for you to go." And you kind of get the sense from this song that he's saying that, and it's hard to know if he's actually writing this autobiographically, but there's some stuff going on in his life now that makes a person think that probably was speaking somewhat painfully from his own experience, that this looks like the situation where, Phil Collins himself, if this is written personally, is not necessarily wanting the relationship to end, but the other person has ended it. And so his cry here is like, you could have at least tried to bridge that distance, but that was just too far for you. Like, isn't that the case sometimes, though, in our relationships? It just ends up that we kind of drift apart. We discover that there are things that divide us, and it takes effort, doesn't it, to bridge that distance, to kind of work through those obstacles. It is not easy to make relationships work over the long haul. And then he discusses in the kind of the bridge about how humans just never seem to learn from their mistakes. They go straight back in looking for a relationship, but ending up with pain. He says, people are funny sometimes because they just can't wait to get hurt again. And I look at this, you can look at this from a psychological perspective. Wouldn't it be nice to actually learn how to do relationships well in your existing relationship, instead of just simply trying over and over again to try to hit the restart button with somebody new? Because the best way that we learn is by working it out fighting through, overcoming those challenges together in those existing relationships. But I think, again, this song comes back to what is kind of the pity party of this song. And many, pop artists are good at, wanting us to feel sorry for them, for their, sad little lives. And, Justin Bieber's got a song out today, I'm so lonely. I'm just like, come on, guys. I understand your life's probably hard, but get over it. There's a lot of people whose lives are hard. You know what I mean? Anyway, but this last little bit, there was always something more important to do, more important to say. But I love you wasn't one of those things. And now it's too late. So we can certainly talk for a moment about the truth of the struggle of relationships. We can look at this from a psychological, from a pragmatic perspective. But this is theology of pop music. So let me think about this from a theological perspective. The reality is humans are very good at destroying relationships. It's not always that we're malicious or that we are bad people. It's just things happen. And when things happen, you have to deal with them. You have to communicate with those people who are valuable in your life. You have to compromise with those people. You have to work together. And that's not always easy. But we see God going the extra mile in trying to form relationship with us. We can hear this in a number of verses, especially like in Romans chapter 5, verses 6 through 11, where Paul writes that for while we were still weak, at the right time, Christ died for the ungodly. That God went the extra mile for you. That's what's amazing to consider, is that despite the fact that we have messed up, despite the fact that we have done things to sabotage our relationship with others and with God, God goes the extra mile to try to help us repair the relationship, not just with God, but with others. Listen to this for verse 10. For if while we were enemies, we were reconciled to God through the death of his Son, much more surely, having been reconciled, will we be saved by his life. So in other words, we have a great God who has bridged the gap, who has tried to reach across to make a way for us, in spite of the things that have happened, in spite of the distance between us. God has worked overtime. And Jesus has even given his own life so that we might live in relationship with each other. And of course, the challenge for us now is not just simply to say, okay, God, thank you for making a relationship with me, but to say, okay, now we as God's people are to be people who reconcile relationships around us. So instead of us sitting around sobbing as Christians saying, do you remember? It's our job to do the best we can. To try to not be people who just simply remember the way things used to be, but to try to make relationships good even today. We know not every relationship can be saved. We know that not everyone wants to have a relationship with you, with me, sadly. But we know that there are ways that we can fight for the people we value. We can fight for a relationship, not just inside the church, but with people outside the church. Imagine the lengths God's gone to for you. And that's what we're supposed to imagine in our thinking of relationships with one another. Thanks for listening. Have a great week.